Now, who doesn't like the Battle of Hoth? From the second you see the AT-ATs for the first time, you just know the rebels are in deep, deep trouble. What's that coming over the hill? Is it a robot? Is it a robot? Also, from the perspective of me specifically, what I loved about this is that Hoth gave us two brand new wicked Star Wars vehicles. The Imperial Walker on one side and then the Rebel Snowspeeder. I mean, these are easily up there with the X-Wing and the TIE Fighter as must-own toys for any kid. Now, according to the Star Wars Essential Guide to Vehicles and Vessels, the all-terrain assault transport was actually invented for use on worlds where repulsor technology couldn't be relied on. Apparently wheels just never got invented in Star Wars, like they went straight to hover cars apparently and giant stumpy robots. This is corroborated in the more recent and also canon, by the way, Star Wars Complete Vehicles, which also goes on to ratify that the Giant Walker's design is a deliberate decision to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies. The Rebel Snowspeeder, on the other hand, is a lot more humble. It is a civilian T-47 airspeeder modified for the extreme temperatures of Hoth. In case you've ever found yourself wondering about this, T-47s do come with those harpoons and tow cable launchers as a standard feature. According to the Essential Guide to Vehicles, these are used for hauling around hover cargo, and you see this in other Star Wars stuff, so it kind of makes sense here. I think that's pretty cool. Of course, really, all I'm talking about here is this is like imagination fodder. This for me is what I love about Star Wars, and this for me is what makes the Hoth thing so good. It all translates into this really, really fun bit of cinema. And really, I guess the point of this video is that this all translates into an excellent game. We all recreated it using the sofa cushions in our living rooms with our little Star Wars toys. Bonus points if, like me, your Auntie Jane had a sheepskin rug that you could put over the top to make it all look like snow. It's no real surprise that game developers would want to tap into that. They'd want to put that into their games. So also then it is no surprise that this has appeared in just so many computer games throughout all of history. Being able to fly your own snowspeeder, bringing down the AT-AT yourself, it became for me at least as nostalgic as watching the film in the first place. Not every game in history has actually captured that sensation perfectly. There've been a few swings and a few misses, but you know, where there's a will, there's a way, and what you'll see is once they get the formula down, taking down an AT-AT just like Wedge and Wes did in the film, it becomes such a powerful memory for so many of us, and that's why I wanted to go through them all here. So here they all are, all played, all listed in order. Hello everybody, my name is Matty, you are watching The Game Show, and this is the history of the AT-AT Takedown in computer games. The very first attempt to recreate the Hoth scene was in fact from the very first Star Wars game ever made. The Empire Strikes Back by Parker Brothers was released in 1982 for the Intellivision and for the Atari 2600. You're flying your little snowspeeder left and right trying to shoot down some AT-ATs. I think it's a pretty cool looking game. I mean, your snowspeeder is what, 15 pixels? And it still manages to look the part, so good on them there. Like pretty much all games from this era though, Empire Strikes Back is crazy hard, and there's no win state to speak of. You just fly your snowspeeder around shooting down AT-ATs until you run out of lives. You're just running for the old high score here. There aren't any tow cables in this Hoth sequence, so it's not a particularly screen accurate representation, but considering the entire game takes up less than 4 kilobytes, I'd say that Parker Brothers did a pretty solid job here. I'll give them 3 Whompers for effort on that. Atari's Star Wars arcade cabinet was a real big hitter back in 1983, and it is still considered even now to be one of the all-time greatest arcade machines. 2 years after the game actually came out, Atari released a conversion kit so that arcades could keep punters interested. Now this time they were going to be taking inspiration from the Battle of Hoth, so the game was The Empire Strikes Back. Now the game was ported to home computers at the time, and what you can see here is me playing this pretty ropey Amiga version. As you can see, you are firing tow cables at the AT-AT's legs, but it's more like a giant version of Boba Fett's like whipcord that he throws at people. It's not really the same sequence from the film. It is a step towards the real thing though, so that is very good, but we weren't quite there yet. Next up is 1991's The Empire Strikes Back on the NES. In the Hoth level on Empire Strikes Back, you are circling the AT-ATs, which is pretty cool actually, but you'll notice that there's also no tow cable. You're back to blast them like you were in the Atari 2600 game. A bit of a shame, but one thing that is pretty cool though is if your snowspeeder gets destroyed, RIP Dak, then Luke can actually run along and then he can run underneath the AT-ATs, rappel up inside and throw a grenade in there. In a way, the screen accuracy here is like giving with one hand and taking with another. There was a surprisingly good port of this on the Game Boy as well, which is pretty cool, which manages to do all the same stuff but just on that tiny little screen. The first real breakthrough in the Hoth sequence comes from Super Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back on the Super Nintendo. Now, you want to talk about hard games, this is a game that you should check out. If it wasn't for emulation and save states, I would never have seen the later levels in these games. They're crazy. So in the Hoth sequence here, what you can see is you are flying your little snow speeder, you are dropping the tow cable around the AT-AT's legs, and you are looping around them. Unfortunately, it's a lot harder than it needs to be. The controls are partly at fault here, I guess, but looking at this with context, considering that this is done in mode 7 with sprite scaling on a little 16-bit console, that's a real technical achievement. The SNES was a real powerhouse, man, and games like this remind me of just how good that console was. Super Empire Strikes Back has no real right to look this good, but it does, and that's awesome. And this is the first game to get the gameplay, the sound, and the music working together at the same time. I feel like that is a huge step towards recreating the Battle of Hoth properly in a computer game. So good on them. This is by far the best one yet. And it pains me to have to go through the next one. God, I wish I didn't have to play this game. This was released the same year as Super Empire Strikes Back. Rebel Assault is a really good idea, it's just really badly realised. Now, I recently actually gave away my boxed copies of this game on DOS because I just knew I was never going to play it again, and they're just so awful I didn't even want them in my house. Now, any nostalgia lads who are watching the channel will know that during the early 90s, the CD-ROM was like a really big thing. One of the things that came out of this was the FMV game. I don't really know why, but they were just really big at this time. Looking back now, none of these FMV games have aged well at all. I'm pretty sure, though, that Rebel Assault was actually bad even at the time. There is a Hoth sequence in this game. It's there, but all you're really doing is moving a cursor around on screen and just smashing fire while a really low-res video plays in the background. Like I said, it's good, but it's a bit like, what's that toy when you're a kid? It's like got a steering wheel and there's a road that just kind of runs in the background. It's like that. Like, it's a good idea and I don't want to knock them for it, but I will say that it is by far the least fun game on this whole list. But the good news is we are straight back in with a banger. I'm going to say this now, so hold off with your downvotes until I finish my sentence. Shadows of the Empire is a real arsehole of a game to play. The controls are absolutely shocking, the camera's awful, the PC version isn't actually any better than the N64 version, but I just can't not love this game. There's something about it. I think it's my boy Dash Rendar. I'm just so into it. Even though the rest of the game might actually be a little bit crap, the opening level of Shadows of the Empire is a belter. This is the first time the Battle of Hoth is like properly realised. Real 3D space, you've got excellent graphics, you've got authentic music, the real sound effects. It's all going on here. LucasArts just did a hell of a job. They smashed it out of the park. You're shooting off the tow cable, circling around the AT-AT. It's just spot on. For 1996, this is such an achievement. Brilliant. It does take you a while to figure out the controls. It's a bit wobbly at first. You'd be like my mum when she's trying to play any game with an analog stick, you know, like whoa, 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 whoa. As if I care, man. Shadows of the Empire is absolutely the one. This is a game that makes you really feel like Wedge Antilles. I'll put my hands up in the air and I'll admit that this was a completely new one for me. Star Wars Trilogy Arcade. This is a Sega arcade game which came out on the Sega Model 3 board. The Sega Model 3 was co-developed between Sega and Lockheed Martin. It was de facto the most powerful arcade board in the world, and it shows, you know, look how good this game looks. And then remember, this game came out the same year as Banjo-Kazooie. You don't actually take down the AT-ATs anymore. Again, it's kind of gone back to that rail shooter method that the original arcade game used, but I mean, it just looks so beautiful, so how could I really be that mean to it? Rogue Squadron, has to be said, is a banger. It's one of the all-time N64 greats, right? The Hoth level with the AT-AT takedowns is only in a secret level at the end. It's not really as well realised as Shadows of the Empire. It's still a little bit janky, but come on, who remembers playing this game and the feeling of pride and accomplishment that can only come from single-player Star Wars games? It used to be really hard to emulate Rogue Squadron due to the weird way that it was programmed on the N64. Incredibly though, recent strides in emulation have made this game near flawless on any PC. But if you don't like emulating, the PC version technically is better because it has native joystick support, so it's just pucker, mate. Now, if you thought Rogue Squadron was good, then get a new pair of socks on, pal, because this next one is going to blow them ones straight off. Rogue Squadron 2 is the one. This is it. This is the big banana, the big Shactus, the big E quotatious. Rogue Squadron 2 on the GameCube is one of the all-time great Star Wars games. I've got this running here in Dolphin with all the settings maxed, and it is hard to believe that this game is 20 years old. What an awesome looking game it is. The Hoth sequence here is pretty much perfect. It's just taken everything from previous games and tuned them up. The snow speeder deploying its cable, looping around the AT-AT's legs, I just think this is flawless. In my opinion, I think this is the pinnacle of the AT-AT Takedown. But I'm not saying that the next games on this list are getting worse. It's just that I don't think it ever really got any better than Rogue Squadron 2, because I think this game is fantastic and I don't think it can be beaten. It's a quality game, mate. I should give a bit of a tip of the old fur-lined rebel hat here to Rogue Squadron 3, because it's the only other game on this list which lets you take down AT-ATs as Luke, you know, running up with your little grappling hook and throwing in the grenade. That's a nice little thing, so I thought I'd just throw it in there for you. 2004's Star Wars Battlefront by Pandemic is a real favourite here on the channel, and the sequel, in fact, even more so. Both games feature a Hoth map complete with AT-ATs and with snow speeders. What's really brilliant about Battlefront though is that not only do you have to use the tow cables to bring down the AT-ATs, but you actually need 2 players to do it. One of you needs to fly the actual speeder and one of you needs to aim and fire the tow cable. That is wicked in my opinion. It should be mentioned that it is mega hard to do this. Well done to Pandemic though, because they took something which was well trodden ground at this point and they managed to add something new to it. It makes you really feel like Dak Ralter. 2005's Battlefront 2 doesn't change a huge amount, to be fair, but one significant thing is that this time you can drive the AT-ATs. So now you can experience firsthand the feeling of your giant stompy robot being brought down by a tiny little plane with some string. Next up we've got Lego. Now I feel like at this point Lego is almost becoming some kind of like Godwin's law. Regardless though, the AT-AT takedowns in 2006's Lego Star Wars 2 are well worth talking about actually. Considering by this point we'd been bringing AT-ATs down for like 20 years, it started to feel a little bit like old hat maybe. But Traveller's Tales managed to find a way to keep it fun, and they injected their own kind of sense of Lego magic that they add to all their games, so I think it's well worth talking about. Another little sort of shout out here as well goes to the Game Boy Advance version of the game. The game itself isn't very much to write home about at all, but I just love the cute little isometric graphics and I love that little Hoth level. Nice, that gets an entry on here too. Oh, I've got to mention Force Unleashed, haven't I? Now this is only here really because it's a Force Unleashed and because I like that game so much, but it's there and so, you know, why wouldn't I add it? It's in all my other videos, isn't it? BattlePod is an absolutely sick arcade machine. It has a big 180-degree wraparound screen, the sound, the cockpit design, it's such a cool thing to sit in and play. It follows on the same tradition as the original Star Wars arcade, so it's a rail shooter where you're just going through the more famous Star Wars battles. Just like the original arcade and like Trilogy arcade, you're not actually taking down the AT-ATs, you're just flying around and blasting them. Also, like Trilogy arcade, this game looks amazing and it's loads of fun to play, so come on. A real surprise for me, I don't mind admitting, was how much fun I had with Disney Infinity. I never got into any of that Skylanders, Lego Universe or Amiibo stuff, and so I stayed away from Disney Infinity as well. What I missed out on was a really robust and really entertaining Hoth level. I couldn't get over how fun and how varied all the different AT-AT takedowns were in this game. Like, wow, Team Gobo put in way more effort than they needed to with these sequences. Instead of triggering just the same old falling over animation, each takedown is its own little unique moment. It's amazing. They even react to the cable going around their legs, so sometimes they'll just trip over of their own accord. I don't want to say that this was wasted on a kids game, but I would really love to see this care and attention applied to some of the other games. One thing that I do want to mention though is how hard it was to get this thing up and running. This is mad. I had to buy the game, then I had to buy the base, then I had to buy the figure, then I had to buy the Death Star, and then the figure that I bought didn't work with the Death Star, so I needed to go and buy another figure. I ended up having to read articles online designed for parents like An Idiot's Guide to Disney Infinity. The end result though was good, so do you know what? I should say thank you to you, YouTube viewer, because this is YouTube ad revenue money spent very well. After a big old long gap, we finally got back into the seat of the snowspeeder in DICE's Battlefront in 2015. Now what can I say about Battlefront that hasn't been said 1,000 times before? The action's good, the gameplay's fun. DICE didn't really add a huge amount to the AT-AT Takedown formula, not in the way that Lego or Disney Infinity did. In fact, it's slightly worse because it's harder to pull it off and you can't drive the AT-AT either, so It's not bad all told, it's a good game, it's fun to play, and it does look bloody fantastic. The beauty of hindsight as well is that everything bad that you could level at Battlefront 2015 would be absolutely eclipsed by its sequel, which makes this game look pretty damn good by comparison. Now this is the bit where I have to talk about Battlefront 2, and I just want to say I don't have anything nice to say about EA, and so in order just to be positive, all I wanted to do was just put it in here and mention it. If you've played it and you like it, good. It just wasn't for me. I stole this footage from a YouTuber called Darkness VQ. It does look good. I'm not going to fault that. The game looks awesome, and I actually like the direction they've taken the AT-AT Takedown. It's a different dimension to it again, so good. Good on you, mate. Thumbs up. And there it is. There we have it. That is the history of the AT-AT Takedown in computer games. What an evocative scene in cinema, man. It's appeared in no less than 20 different games, going all the way back to one of the very, very first home console games, all the way up to one of the most recent. There's obviously something here that resonates with us. I don't know if we'll get this again in the future. I imagine we will, and I imagine it'll probably be awesome, because bringing down an AT-AT with a little snowspeeder has almost never been bad. If you hadn't figured from watching the video, my personal favourites are Rogue Squadron 2 on the GameCube and Shadows of the Empire. Dash Rendar is my boy, and I bet you have your own favourites too. Why don't you slap yours in the comments for me and let me know. There's more Star Wars stuff on the channel as well, so check that out, hit subscribe. Brilliant, thanks very much, ta-da.